It's a pleasure to have Reverend Richard Weinberg with me here in this webinar. Um, this is a series of webinar organized by Lifelong Learning Department in VTS, Virginia Theological Seminary. And it is a series of webinars with the topic of crossing cultural boundaries. And this specific webinar with Richard is about how we can spread the communion table beyond our churches. And it is also an opportunity to share ideas, experiences Richard have working with Latinos, although in the parish where he works, he doesn't have a Latino congregation. So this is an opportunity to learn more how to do that and how to engage in working with Latinos in a broader sense. And Richard is a friend, he's a colleague in the Diocese of Washington. He is the priest in charge in St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, and he has also been working in strategic communications in the Diocese of Washington. So for me, it's a pleasure to have you here with Richard.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be with y'all.
Can you lead us in prayer?
Sure. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, thank you for the gift of diversity, for the ways you formed us as your people made in your glorious image. Be with us this hour as we share and learn. Bless us to your service in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. So Richard, one of the first questions I have for you, and this will be almost like a conversation, is mainly what has been your experience working with Latinos and how it has been a call in your ministry and in your vocation as a priest in the Episcopal Church?
Sure. So I think my story has to begin with my childhood, having been raised in Northern Virginia, actually probably like a mile from VTS in Annandale, Virginia. So I grew up in the orbit of the nation's capital, which is of course known for being extremely ethnically diverse. I went to a high school where white kids like me were in the minority. So that just really socialized me in a particular way with exposure to people of other cultures from the beginning of my childhood. I always had an interest in people who were different from me. So I was very curious as a kid, teenager, and a lot of my friends were Central American growing up. I started studying Spanish as a second language as part of the required curriculum when you're a public high school student in Fairfax County, Virginia. Started, I think, in 7th grade. I think I got like 3 months of it in 6th grade, and then a year long, beginning from 7th grade on up to graduating. So that really formed the basis of my affinity with Latin American people. And when I began discerning a call to ordained ministry, if I'm honest and I've realized in this need to confess that I think my initial interest in Latino ministry in the church was out of this sense of, oh, this would be a nice advantage toward toward what I would have to offer as a priest. So I think I was coming at it from very much the wrong reasons at the beginning in my ignorance, as I was starting my journey of discernment before even going off to seminary. But it was in seminary, being placed in a parish that had a Latino congregation and a majority white congregation worshiping in the same space, where I served both communities. Since I was fluent in Spanish, I requested to be placed in a parish during seminary where I could cultivate those gifts on the ministry side of things. And an awesome mentor in a priest who's well known across the church. He's retired now in his native Dominican Republic, Napoleon Brito. He was my mentor there at Christ Church in Norcross, Georgia. I went to Emory Candler School of Theology for seminary, so I'm an uncommon Episcopalian. Everyone asks me why I didn't go to VTS, but it's because I'm from Northern Virginia, and literally VTS is in my backyard, and so I felt like I should get outside of my comfort zone and experience something new. So I think I really learned what it really meant to be an ally and to be in ministry with during my time in seminary, and particularly at Candler. I was selected for this summer internship that you can do where they pay you and cover your expenses to be able to go anywhere in the world and serve a parish for 10 weeks. And so I applied to go to El Salvador, where I'd been once prior, to work for a parish in the capital city. We have an Episcopal Church in El Salvador. And so I was the seminarian there for over a summer. And having that community adopt me as one of their own, and similarly my experience at Christ Church back in Georgia, really taught me what it means to be an ally and be in solidarity with. Coincidentally, I was teaching a class on solidarity based on Jonathan Daniels' life a couple of weeks ago, and so I found a definition of solidarity that I love: when two or more people or groups of people across lines of difference develop a relationship based on a shared value. Mm-hmm. So the idea of solidarity is a noun, but it's also a verb. It's about this action of forming relationships across differences out of a shared value or shared goal.
Richard, I have been sharing with you in many spaces in the diocese, and you are really clear all the time that you are not a Latino, that you are an ally. What does it mean to you that, and how have you been welcomed or not in this condition of an ally of the Latino groups and congregations?
That's interesting. I'm surprised and appreciate your question, including welcome or not, because there are complexities in our cultural differences. One of the aspects that I've navigated my entire ministry thus far, a short ordained ministry thus far, is the fact that I'm openly gay, and Latino culture is different than mainstream American middle-class white culture. And I've had to be mindful of the spaces where I find myself, where I wield privilege and power because of my skin color, but I don't necessarily share all of myself because it would be detrimental toward trying to build that relationship across that line of difference. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't closeted per se in seminary, but I didn't advertise the fact that I was gay with the Latino congregation. So I know from my Latino friends who are Episcopalians, having gone to a couple of the church-wide conferences, Nuevo Amanecer and Nuevos Horizontes, that queer Latinx folks in the Episcopal Church often feel like they have to check their queerness at the door when they're in Latino spaces. And when they're in queer spaces, they sometimes feel they have to check their Latino-ness at the door. And so it's kind of like, where do we fit? So yes, I'm not Latino, I'm an ally. And I think that is an important distinction. I'm kind of in it for life. My partner is from the Dominican Republic, so I know what it's like to be in a relationship with someone who's very different, has a very different background. So acknowledging our differences is not a scary thing. It's an important step in building those relationships.
Yeah,
I kind of talked about the gay thing and some experience of unwelcome. The flip side is that Latino communities are so welcoming, and it's for the sake of knowing when you have power, when you don't, where you can choose to share of yourself. And when that happens, it's beautiful, and you know the Spirit is present.
You share with us your story and your experience outside the United States, and how that whole experience of your life has been a contribution to the work you have been doing here in the United States, in the area of Washington. Um, so yeah, how is that relationship?
So my first experience working abroad was in the Diocese of Costa Rica. Costa Rica of kind of Central America context is probably it's the most developed country economically. So it's unique in the ways that it compares with other settings. There's been a lot of change in that diocese. The bishop that I worked with is now the assistant bishop in the Diocese of Texas, Hector Monterroso. So I can't speak to how things are there currently, but at the time that I served there for about 3 months, I was on sabbatical from when I was working at the National Cathedral before seminary, and it was my first experience being in a context where I was trying to do ministry in Espanol. So it's one thing to be in dialogue on a friendly way. It's another thing to try and preach, to try and teach, to try and lead things in your second language. So I know where you're living right now, UML, in a much more intense way. But that experience was very formative in seeing that, oh, I can do this. It's hard, but if I don't practice, I'm not going to get any better. And then I had the opportunity to be part of a delegation in partnership with Cristo Sal, a nonprofit that spun off from the Episcopal Church in El Salvador, about bringing LGBT Christians in the US, in North America, to El Salvador to learn from the LGBT community that are part of the church in El Salvador, which is why I had the relationship to then go back and serve as seminary in that longer time that I mentioned earlier. So I kind of forget the original question and now feel like I'm rambling, but overall, I think all these experiences just informed me of what firsthand life is like, either as a Salvadoran, as a Central American. And so when I relate to immigrants, first generation immigrants back at home, I know, I mean, in DC, in the DC area at least, Salvadorans are the #1 population of Latinos in the DC area. So when I meet Salvadorans, the fact that I've been to their country, I've spent time there, it just creates that connection that I'm trying to describe, I guess.
Yeah, and I know that you have been very involved with Casa Rubí,
right?
Which has been a wide experience of, I think, bringing the church to a context, a non-religious countries, place, and you have been doing that for more than 1 year, I think. What has been your experience working with them?
So to explain a bit for those watching the webinar, I serve at St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, which is in right in the middle of Washington, D.C. We're an urban parish celebrating our 125th anniversary this season. And St. Margaret's has a very progressive legacy, the first parish in the Diocese of Washington to call a woman as rector, the only parish that we know of that's called 3 women in a row as rector. It also has a deep legacy of inclusion and a long history with the LGBT community. So when I was brought on board first as associate rector under Bishop-elect Kim Lucas, who has gone off to become Bishop of Colorado just this week as we speak. She's in her first House of Bishops meeting. So when Kim hired me as her associate, she gave me the title of parish missioner, which charged me with being in charge of St. Margaret's outreach. And she gave me an opportunity to discern where I was feeling called, given the parish's culture and mission. And Casa Ruby is a LGBT community center that is kind of an all-encompassing social services organization. It has emergency shelter beds, it has transitional housing programs, it has health services, it has support groups. It's, and the founder of Ruby Corrado is an old friend of mine, and she's really kind of a local celebrity, known as an indigenous trans woman who's been in the States a long time. She's Salvadoran originally. So she likes to say that Casa Ruby is a place where all are welcome, but especially those on the margins of the queer community. So Black and brown trans kids from the city, but also a large number of Central American asylum seekers seek refuge at Casa Ruby. So when I was new as associate rector at St. Margaret's, I reached out to my friend there, who's the program director, and I said, so I'm a priest now, we haven't talked in a while, would you be interested in us partnering to see how St. Margaret's and I would be able to support the community at Casa Ruby? And the first thing he said to me is, yeah, we get a lot of interest from lots of different groups. If you really want to make a difference, just come, just show up. I don't know what we'll do yet, but just start coming. And he told me to come without my collar and just come as a member of the community. And so I started doing that. It was, I think for the community there, maybe strange to have this random white guy show up in their space, but I was welcomed as one of their own. It was clear that I'm not Latino, but I was there and interested in learning. So I had been going to weekly support group meetings for a couple of months or so, I think, when in discussing with the program director, decided to come out as a priest and shared with the community that I would love to be in conversation about their spiritual health and their relationship with God. And so we kind of took a poll about who might be interested, and everyone was interested. And so I began hosting a series of occasional, what might look like to others in the church, kind of like Sunday school class, essentially, but taking it on the road, and unfortunately never being able to do it on a regular frequency, but more like seasonally, I would show up, we'd schedule a special workshop moment to have a class. And our relationship grew from there. Then they invited me to come lead a mass. So that was the first opportunity that, oh yay, photos. So this is the first, on the right is kind of just a group of folks from one of the classes I was teaching. On the left is the room where we had the Eucharist service for Christmas Eve. And it kind of, can't really tell, there was probably about 50 people there that night. And then they had a big party afterwards. And beforehand, I'm not sure if the other photos made it to UIML. Oh yes, there's one. So a week before the Mass, we, St. Margaret's donated that Christmas tree behind everyone. And members of St. Margaret's came to decorate the tree together with the community members at Casa Ruby. And then we had the service following week. That's another class that I taught with the group. So they're participatory. A lot of the pedagogical tools that I'm using, I learned in seminary and youth ministry class. But I say youth ministry applies to people of all ages. So it's mostly about engaging folks where they are and talking about their life experiences and facilitating sharing, and then bringing God into the conversation as a second piece. That's kind of like the back doorway in. That's my, to my immediate right or left in the photo is my senior warden, Jane Quick. On the right is a longtime Altar Guild member, and that's Jane's wife on the end, Tracy. So that's at the first year Christmas service. And they were so sweet. I see what the next photo is by Mel.
Yeah.
Number 6.
One of the objectives of this webinar is just to share how other congregations can get involved in specific experiences as you did, even though they don't have a Latino congregation in their parish. How was that process with St. Margaret? I mean, how they received that invitation, and how has been their experience getting in connection with the Latinos in the area?
Yeah, so St. Margaret's is a multicultural parish, which Canon Paula Clark in the diocese defines as if more than a third, or at least a third, of your community are non-white, then your parish is multicultural. As we know, the Episcopal Church is really lacking in racial diversity. The last survey that the research people released said something like nearly 90% of the Episcopal Church is white. And by the year, I don't know what the population estimation people, sometimes I see different years, but say by the year 2024 or something like that, we will no longer be a white majority country. And so that begs the question for the future of our church, which is why the urgent work of the presiding bishop and racial reconciliation is so important. That said, St. Margaret's community as a community was very receptive to working with Casa Ruby. It had a lot of synergy with our mission. We have an on-site homeless ministry already at St. Margaret's called Charlie's Place. So St. Margaret's has been in ministry with people experiencing homelessness for more than 20 years. And given our history with the LGBT community, it made sense to be part of an organization and support an organization that had such a similar mission. So there's been great support. The challenge for me as the priest has been to increase the reach and participation of those on the parish side with those on the Casa Ruby side. So it's been maybe at most around a dozen members of St. Margaret's who have been physically present with me in the Casa Ruby space. But certainly everyone has supported financially and prayerfully as we keep the community informed of the relationship. Just on this past Ash Wednesday, the offering went to Casa Ruby. Ruby recently returned from San Antonio, Texas. ICE released with no notice 15 queer young people who were part of one of the caravans from Honduras. And ICE released them in San Antonio with nowhere to go. And Ruby drove a van to pick them up and bring them back to Washington, D.C., and she's now housing them. So all of our offerings from Ash Wednesday services are going to support them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What in this whole process, in this diverse experience you've had, not only with Casa Ruby, but also your experience before in the United States, outside the United States, what have you learned as a priest in this process, and how this experience transform or not your theology, your understandings about mission, about what the church is or should be?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think the learnings are different in each of the experiences I've had. So sticking with Casa Ruby for the time being, like the biggest learning is that space matters, and being outside of our church's walls matters. And I would like to say that St. Margaret's is a community that's ready to welcome and be changed by trans young adults. But it matters that we go to them first. If it's a community that hasn't been welcomed in many spaces, to go to a community that is theirs, where we're the guests, has been very transformative. So space matters, being outside of our church's walls matters. I see a question from Leslie.
Yeah, Leslie is asking, how does St. Margaret's reach out to the neighborhood in which it is situated in the North Dupont Circle, Calorama? And what kind of connection exists? Is the neighborhood relevant to your ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that St. Margaret's is a deep connection to the DuPont Circle and Calorama community through our ministry that's called Charlie's Place. We serve our homeless neighbors and hungry neighbors 5 mornings a week on site in our parish hall. And so we employ a full-time director of the program who's a licensed social worker who does case management. And that was founded by an associate rector back in the 80s or so. It's been around for at least 20 years, if not 25 years. And that program originated out of needs in the community. So the associate rector at the time noticed that there were increasing number of Latino men in Columbia Heights who were experiencing homelessness, and the ministry began by feeding them, and then it grew into an actual organized ministry with professional staff. All but a couple of our employees are previous clients, so we help people get housing. We make referrals. I started a prayer group with our clients. So our biggest connection to the neighborhood, I think, is through the network of those who are supporting those who are experiencing homelessness in the district.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Leslie, for your question. In the last service you had during Christmas in Casa Ruby, you invited me to be there as a deacon, and I really appreciate that experience. And I remember something you said before the Eucharist. You said, "You are welcome to the table, to this table. This is not St. Margaret's, not the Episcopal Church table. This is the table of the Lord." It really struck those words to me. Can you share a little bit? What has been your experience about the communion and the Eucharist table in a place, in a non-commonly religious place, and how it had opened a new perspective for you in this sense?
So that was the third Eucharist that I've celebrated with Casa Ruby. The first was Christmas the year prior, and then we did one around Pride last year, and then Christmas that you were a part of. The number of people who received communion at the service where you served as deacon was pleasant surprise to me. Not as many people had received in the other 2 services that we've done. I'm not gonna try to devise the Holy Spirit's workings in that, but I wonder if it has to do with the fact that this is the 3rd time. At that point, we'd been in a relationship for over a year and a half, and the fact that that evening it was a bilingual service, so both English-speaking young adults and the Latino community of Casa Ruby were together for the first time. So maybe that had something to do with it. But I'm mindful that even if people don't receive communion because maybe they're cradle Catholics, and if you know what that means, myself, I'm a cradle Roman Catholic, The idea of access to the table and the sacrament is complex, and it's kind of ingrained in you as a child if you're raised in the Roman Catholic Church. So it still matters that the sacrament is celebrated. They still want to hear the prayers that they remember from childhood or from their home countries. So that's what I'd say on that.
Yeah, thank you. My last question is, if people who are listening to you right now, that they don't have they don't have a Latino congregation in their parish as you, what could be your advice for them in how they can engage more supporting the Latino community wherever they are?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to answer that question. We have amazing leaders in Latino ministry in our church. Most dioceses have Latino missioners, so I'd reach out to them. The only advice I can offer is to educate thyself. Know that there's so much we can learn if you're not Latino yourself about Latin American history. We don't need to wait for our Latino neighbors or friends to teach us their history. There are resources where we can learn ourselves and educate ourselves. For example, knowing about the history of migration, knowing about the history of the border, the history of US policy, the ways that Reagan's legacy is still affecting our border crisis today, and also the diversity of Latinos, right? The future of Latino ministry, Anthony Guillen, the head of Latino Hispanic Ministries for the Episcopal Church, reminds everyone all the time that the future of Latino ministries for the church is not with first generation immigrants, which it has been. All mainline Protestants primarily have focused their ministries with first generation immigrants. The population of Latinos in the United States has grown tremendously, and there's a long history of their presence here. And so the future of Latino ministry is with English dominant Latinos who might be bilingual. And so exploring bilingual worship, not for the sake of mixing gringos and Latinos, but for the sake of mixing multi-generational Latinos in themselves. So educating yourself, using resources like the Becoming Beloved Community Initiative of the presiding bishop, engaging an expert, and if you engage someone, please pay them for their advice, and maybe leading a discernment process. For me, learning through mistakes of, don't take the lead. I think we're used to taking the lead as church leaders, and for those of us socialized as white. Don't plan something before engaging with the community that you're trying to reach. Be in community with them first, show up first. And similarly, maybe rather than you leading, you need to make space for someone else to lead in your space. That's the advice I'd offer in humility.
Thank you. In a more personal,
you a question?
In a more personal,
may I ask you a question, Yormel?
Yeah, sure.
How was your experience of serving as deacon at the Christmas service?
Yeah, it was a transforming experience, I think. I am still in the seminary, training to be ordained as a priest next June. So I received classes of liturgy, and of course, none of my professors teach us what to do in a context like that, where there is not a typical congregation, where people can have different kind of religious experience in their past. So just seeing the engagement that they had with the service, and just coming in confidence that they were part of that service, and that it is a lot of confidence from their part, because they know you, because you have been with them during all this time, but I was a new person there. So I really appreciate the welcoming energy they had, and the confidence to come to receive communion, and to sing and to engage with the music and with the prayers. So it was really a transforming experience for me as a future priest in the Episcopal Church, and I really appreciate and thank you.
Awesome. For that. We need to go back.
Yes, sure. So in a more personal approach, you are beginning as a priest in charge in St. Margaret. Thank you. Congratulations for that. And do you have any plans to continue a work like that in the future? What's your plans as a priest in charge now?
That's too difficult. So it's a week and a half of being priest in charge of St. Margaret's. And unfortunately, due to budget realities at St. Margaret's, since I was the associate rector, there's no one replacing me as associate rector. So I'm going to be a solo priest for at least this next season of ministry, which means that the job is bigger, the responsibilities are more. And we're about to launch a strategic planning process as part of Bishop Marianne Buddy's initiative. So I'm optimistic and excited, but I want to let the community enter this time of discernment together about its future. I've acknowledged with them that to me, it is a personal calling, that the Spirit has marked me as an ally, and I can't not feed that part of my my whether I'm doing that as priest in charge of St. Margaret's or I'm doing that simply as a disciple. I will find a way, but it won't be as frequent as I probably would like, and that they could stand to benefit from.
Thank you. Thank you to all the people who are following us during this webinar. You got this, as I said before at the beginning, this is the first of a series of webinars with the title of Crossing Cultural Boundaries. And we are planning to have another webinars about how can we support other experiences working with Latinos as formation. What is the Episcopal Church offering as formation for people who wants to get involved with the Latino groups and congregation, and also another webinar about advocacy and how we can get more involved in advocacy groups and experiences through the Episcopal Church. So be in touch. We can follow what is happening in the lifelong learning department in VTS, in the website and in Facebook, so we can continue being in touch. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Raymel. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.